A sudden flash of light streaks out toward the city clock tower. A moment later, a cannonball makes contact with a thundering crash, and a portion of the tower collapses, raining debris everywhere. Estimating landing points and dispersion range, 5.34 seconds until falling debris impacts ground. At the base of the tower, a man performs rapid calculations, then takes 10 quick paces back. When he stops, the debris strikes the very spot where he had stood just moments before, creating a billowing plume of dust. But the man pays it no mind. Instead, he focuses on the enemy base that fired the cannon. This battle unfolds in a technologically advanced city of an enemy country. A city where smoke now rises from every corner. The king the man serves has a reputation as a tyrant, and has conquered many other nations through force of arms. This war was sparked when he severed diplomatic ties. And like many sparks, it has turned into a raging inferno. Whenever the man spies an enemy unit, he silently pulls his gun from the holster. One bullet, one kill. The enemy never knows what hits them. His is a supernatural, inhuman precision. He is a mechanical soldier, a clockwork man without life, developed expressly for the purpose of fighting in war. The man dashes across the battlefield, staying low. He has orders to scout out the enemy forces. It has long been assumed that both armies are of equal strength. But the enemy has developed a new weapon, one that can launch massive artillery shells over great distances. Their front line has been losing ground, and it is now only a matter of hours before the main base comes into range of the enemy's guns. Having finished his scouting mission and dispatched what enemy soldiers he could find, the man returns to the base. Base is a generous term. In truth, it is little more than a large tent set up to temporarily house their commanders. Inside the tent, a map of the city is spread across a large table. Pawns have been placed on it to show the state of various units. The lead commander is a boy, one too young to even serve in battle. Your decision, Highness? The Highness spoken of is the boy, the kingdom's eldest prince. It is he who sent the clockwork man on his scouting mission. And though the prince volunteered for this command, he now finds himself with the unenviable task of making decisions that hold sway over the fate of the entire war. Eventually, one of his generals suggests using some of their own men as a distraction in order to get the drop on the enemy. The prince frowns at this proposal before rejecting it. He is still clearly a boy in thought as well as appearance. He is unable to sacrifice any of his own men, even when it might lead to the survival of many times that number. It is naivety, and it is on clear display for all to see. The general who made the suggestion scoffs at this decision. "Your hesitation will kill us all," he cries. He slams both hands on the table to better illustrate his point. Then he announces his intention to take his men and fight as he sees fit, before storming out of the tent in disgust. Such division amongst the ranks only worsens the situation. Yet the prince continues to issue commands. It is unclear what so spurs him to action. The clockwork man stands to one side of the tent and watches the prince from the corner of his eye. Though he says nothing, he knows the lack of leadership will eventually lead the enemy right to their door. And all too soon, this comes to pass. "The base is lost, my prince," says the clockwork man. "You must flee and save your own life." "No," replies the prince. "I'll not leave while my men are still out there fighting and dying." Though the man calmly explains that the prince has no choice but retreat, his young charge does not seem to understand. There is a flash. A cannonball explodes into the tent, blowing it apart. All that remains is a massive crater and a few scraps of fabric. The man hears harsh breathing and turns his head. The young prince is running behind him. Just before the cannonball struck, he grabbed the prince and forcibly removed him from the tent. Now, the two of them run through an underground tunnel that leads outside the main part of the city. Behind them, the sounds of war gradually diminish. War still raged in every corner of the city. This is why the clockwork man is leading the prince away. As he runs, he examines every corner for danger, looks in every shadow for possible ambush. The prince follows, gasping for breath. Eventually, the prince loses his footing and falls to the ground with a cry. The man stops. Part of his orders are to protect the prince. Though they gave him information on a need-to-know basis, he was told the prince suffers from a congenital disease. If he forced him to run further, it might cause serious harm. The man quickly scans the area. The tunnel is massive, stretching on without end in both directions. The tracks that run under his feet speak to its use as a train tunnel during better times. After a brief search, he locates a door in the wall. It is half buried in debris, but when the man peers inside, he finds a small storage room behind it. Slumbering within are battered lanterns, picks, and shovels. It is a storage place for tools used to maintain the tunnel. Thinking it the perfect spot to lie low, the man brings his young charge inside. "This is all because I took command," says the prince sadly. With his ragged breaths now steadied, he is able to turn a critical eye upon his earlier actions. As his kingdom commits to a cycle of endless war, soldiers and citizens alike are growing increasingly weary. The prince chose to take on the burden of command so he might be able to save them all. But in the end, things did not transpire as he wanted. He never considered having to place the lives of his own soldiers on the scales. But he now sees that what he thought of as kindness had instead brought death and pain to multitudes. The man stares at the boy and considers his words. "You did well," he says finally. As the words leave his mouth, they feel strange, off. He cannot grasp the intention behind what he said. It is simply the natural phrase he arrived at when he saw the prince's grieved expression. The boy stares at the man blankly. They wait that way for a bit, alone in the darkness. But then, a small glimmer of brightness returns to his face. With an awkward, unpracticed smile, the boy thanks the man for saving his life during the recent battle. "If I am ever in danger again," he says, "maybe you can help me out." His words come with a hint of jest, but also a touch of joy. The Clockwork Man continues his conversation with the prince, but as they do so, the boy's coughs come more frequently. He eventually produces a medicine bottle from his pocket. The man surmises it is used to suppress the cough, but the bottle is empty. A pained look moves across the prince's face, one that he tries and fails to hide. "The royal family cannot show weakness around others," he says. "This is a lesson my father taught me again and again." He had not coughed once at the base because the medicine was able to disguise his symptoms. But now, that is why what you see here must remain a secret. His speech complete, the boy raises a pinky finger and extends it to the Clockwork Man. The man's database tells him this is a human ritual of promise. Though he intertwines his finger with the prince's, the action makes him somehow uneasy. The man suddenly hears the distant sound of footsteps. He concentrates his oral apparatus on the noise. Enemy soldiers, most likely. He estimates a dozen or so. He fixes his eyes on the gap in the door, half buried in rubble. A thin, wavering line of light passes through it. He will never outrun the men with the sickly prince in tow. So both man and prince still their breaths, stay put, and wait. The man places his hand over the boy's mouth so he will not give them away. The light through the door grows brighter, then brighter still. The prince's body betrays them both. They sit in the darkened room. The man presses a hand against the prince's mouth to still his breathing. Men, most likely enemy soldiers, are approaching their position. But as they wait for them to pass, the prince's cough rips through the silence. "Here," yells a soldier. "They're here." The room surrounded. The man knows he has no choice but to destroy every last soldier in order to keep the prince safe. He kicks open the door and pulls his weapon from his holster. But he does not fire. "Highness, you live," says the general from before. Sensing the turning tide of battle, he had taken his men and abandoned the base before seeking shelter in the tunnel. The prince is clearly relieved to see his rescuers arrive. But as he approaches the soldiers, the general raises a hand and his men point their swords at him. The prince stops moving, and confusion spreads across his face. This sight causes the general to snicker. He then explains a shocking truth. A plot has been unfolding behind the scenes. The prince is to be murdered, and his death blamed on the war. The plan was set in motion by his younger brother, who sought to eliminate his competition for the throne. During the previous battle, they had set their units in inferior positions in order to tilt the battle in favor of the enemy. After their position was overrun, they would use the ensuing chaos as cover to eliminate the prince. Once this was accomplished, the kingdom would send reinforcements to win back all the ground they had lost. "This can't be happening," murmurs the prince. The general grins wide. Suddenly, the clockwork man turns to the general, who immediately barks an order. "You there, machine, stand down at once." The man is a mechanical soldier manufactured by the kingdom. He is programmed to follow any order from a superior officer. So at the general's command, he freezes. He watches dispassionately as the general approaches the boy with his sword unsheathed. The prince does not yield ground, but instead stares blankly in the shock of his own country betraying him. But rather than strike the killing blow, the general takes the chance to berate his prey. "You're a useless worm, an unthinking coward who put all of us in danger in a sad attempt to earn your daddy's approval. I've lost men because of you. Good men. Friends." Tears begin to spill down the prince's cheeks, but he does not deny the truth of these words. His piece said, the general raises his sword above his head and prepares to strike. The clockwork man cannot accept what he is seeing. "I must protect the prince. I must stop the general. I must reach for my gun." But because of the general's orders, he can do nothing. Instead, in the face of the prince's last moments, he accesses records of the boy in his memory banks. He sees how the prince desperately issued commands in an attempt to keep his soldiers safe. He sees how the prince showed weakness and trusted him. Suddenly, his records find a phrase the prince said moments before. "If I am ever in danger again." The man draws iron, his hand as fast as blue blazes, and blows the general's sword arm from his body. He fires again, and again, and again. The general's men, caught off guard, fall one after the other. The prince had said the line in passing jest. "If I am ever in danger again, maybe you can help me out." But the clockwork man chooses to take these words as royal orders that demanded absolute obedience. Orders that override even those of a senior military officer. The wounded general snarls and draws his own weapon. The clockwork man shoots it out of his hand. In the blink of an eye, the tables have turned. The ground is painted red. The general begins to plead for his life, but it means nothing to the man who presses his barrel against the general's temple. "Stop," cries the prince. Despite the general's actions, the prince still seeks to save his life. Though he did not speak his feelings aloud, the man understands the reason behind the request, and so lowers his weapon. A moment later, more footsteps ring out. This time, it is not traitors, but the enemy army. The man has a choice: save the general, or save the boy. He lifts the prince up and begins to run. "I couldn't save him," says the prince as the general's cries grow weaker. "I tried, but I couldn't." In the middle of a wasteland where the wind blows dry stands a kingdom surrounded by walls. The contours of an enormous castle waver as the sun sets behind it. The clockwork man and the prince approach the kingdom with a sigh. They are home. They stand before a thick metal door at the castle gate that leads to the town beyond. A guard sees the two and approaches. "Your Highness, I see you are safe." Everyone assumed the prince had met his end in battle, and the guards are unable to hide their shock. The guards respectfully place the prince on a carriage headed for the castle. But as he watches the prince go, the clockwork man is presented with a false warrant for his alleged crimes. The first charge, abandoning his post. A second charge, betraying his unit. The third charge, murder of a superior officer. The man did what he did to save the life of the prince. Though the accusations are willful mistruths at best, he has no way to combat them. And even if they were completely true, he still believes what he did was right. The clockwork man is taken to a laboratory. A researcher orders him into a mechanical chair and places alloy fixtures on his limbs and torso. His treatment will be a complete memory wipe. The man's consciousness drifts in darkness. It is a strange sensation, almost like floating. This is his memory space. In the darkness, images begin to form. He sees men blasted to bits by his own steel. Memories of war. The face of every man he's ever killed is recorded here. Next, he sees a conversation he had with the general. He is being ordered to protect the prince at all cost. Images appear. Images flicker. Images disappear. He sees him, desperately issuing orders at the base. He sees his pained expression as he spoke of his weakness. He sees him shed tears at hearing the truth behind the war. That is why what you see here must remain a secret. He sees the secret promise and ritual they shared. Compared to his other memories, these almost seem to glow. Suddenly, a sound, a single, insistent buzz. His memories of the prince begin to fade. He cannot stop it. They vanish one after the other. He should not be bothered by this. After all, he is a mechanical soldier designed for war. The memory reset program whirs inside him. Though he should be accepting the procedure without pause, the man resists the deletion of any memories of the prince. He reaches out to them with his mind, but he will never find them. The deletion accelerates. The buzzing grows louder. A pained groan slips from his lips. What was the meaning behind his own feelings? Why did he resist the procedure? The man's eyes spring open. He does not know why he is in the laboratory. He knows only that he is a mechanical soldier created for war. One researcher looks at the results and shakes his head. Looks like there was an error in the reset process. You're going to be discarded. After being informed of his fate, the man is taken away and placed in an underground storehouse. His only companion is the hiss of steam escaping from pipes. Mixed in among similarly discarded scraps of junk, the man attempts to sleep. But an alien sensation in his chest prevents it. Even after he searches all parts of his memory, he cannot locate the cause. He realizes that thinking about it will accomplish nothing. All he can do is wait as he slowly rots away. There is someone I must see. What comes to mind at the very end is nonsense. But the man ignores it, and instead slowly closes his eyes.
The hush of night falls over the castle. Unsteady footsteps and scraping metal echo through marble corridors. A pallid face, unease, exhaustion. The guards offer to help their liege as he walks, but he waves them off and leans heavier on his aged metal staff. "I'm fine," he insists. A clear lie. More than anything, the boy simply wishes to be alone. The illness which has long eaten away at his body has now begun to prey on his weakened heart. His vision wavers. He takes an unsteady step, then another, cursing heavy feet that seem unconnected to his legs. Every time he coughs, the scent of metal fills his head. Yet he continues to walk alone. He is the first prince of this nation. But that is not how people know him. The prince, kind to the point of simplicity, has long dreamed of seeing his land at peace. Yet now, even that compassion seems to have vanished from his dimming gray eyes. He finally arrives at his room. Lacking the strength to spark a lamp, he collapses in the dark. As breath leaks from his withered body, he leans against a wall and lets his thoughts spin. He thinks back on his day, on the battle. As he was responsible for the spark that set off the war, he volunteered to lead on the front lines. Racked with guilt, he sought to bring the conflict to a peaceable conclusion as quickly as possible. But the world does not turn on a child's dreams alone. War has taught him just how harsh reality can be, and just how soft he is. Though he once yearned for a world at peace, he now understands such things to be the gibbering dream of a madman. As he hangs his head in despair, he notices something on the floor. It is a folded piece of paper. Someone must have slipped it under the door. After a brief moment of fear, he reaches out to take it. It contains rows of numbers, dead and injured as a result of the most recent battle. The moment it registers, tears blur his vision. The number is so much larger than usual. All those lives, gone, vanished like smoke in the wind. He thought he understood the weight of his sins. Yet this new number causes his heart to creak anew. The deaths, the numbers, they had always been something apart from himself, something vague. But this piece of paper makes them terribly real. Thus, he blames himself. His gaze rests sadly on the paper in his hands. And then, a realization. Someone wrote this for him. In today's battle, his brother attempted to take the prince's life and put himself next in line for the throne. In much the same manner, someone wrote this note to amplify his guilt, to point out how his hypocrisy comes at the greatest of costs. And whoever believes this lurks in the shadows of the very castle he calls home. Perhaps wishing for peace is a mistake. Perhaps his life is a mistake. His naivete led only to tragedy. Every action he took and every belief he held dear has all been for naught. As he sits alone in the dark, he hears the sounds of conversation from the corridor, and soon his shoulders begin to shake with quiet, maniacal laughter. He can never return to the light again. He locks the door and drags his heavy body to his desk. He tears open the top drawer, causing his most precious possessions to clatter to the ground. Among them is a knife with a wicked edge. His clouded eyes gaze upon it. His hand hovers above it. There is no point in any of this. No point in his body, in his dreams. They are things utterly without worth. Perhaps the world would be better off without them. A cold sensation settles over him, one that makes him feel not himself. It is as if the warmth he once felt from his arm is now a thing separate from his body. Or more accurately, one could say it felt as though its warmth was flowing out of him. From some distant place, he ponders his own actions. Drops fall from his arm, causing red splotches to slowly spread across the rock below. It looks so much like what he saw that day. The dreadful sight that set the entire affair in motion. It is a memory that haunts him and will continue to do so for the rest of his days. He sits there throughout the long night, recalling the face of the girl who lost her life amidst the crimson smudges. When the dawn's light finally streams through a gap in the curtains, it finds the boy hunched over his desk, staring at his arm. With a new day arrived, there is no choice but to carry on. But in his red and muddled blackness, the brilliance of the day feels like pain. Peace is nothing more than a simple wish, a simple kindness. Yet the price for that wish had been dear, with a great many lives lost in its name. There will always be sacrifices in times of war. That is simply the way of things. The boy remembers hearing those words, and they cut straight to the core of him. Perhaps they were right, he thinks to himself. Perhaps I will never escape the horror of my sins. He spent the entire night on the floor, wrapped in his pain, as though he sought to punish himself. The brilliant morning sun pouring through the window brings no light to his heart. His body is still caked with blood and earth from the battlefield. His bleary eyes reflect white curtains dancing in the wind. He does not know why the window has been left open when he yearns only for darkness and respite. When he approaches the window, the fluttering curtains agitate his spirit, but as he grasps them, he hears the sounds of argument from outside. He cannot make out the words, but in the tone, he senses anger, as well as a deep sadness. He peeks through the curtains in search of the speakers. They are somewhere beyond the gate, out of sight. The voices rise and fall, agitated. Someone is clearly in trouble. Can he help? He forcibly clears the weight from his mind and begins moving to action. But then, he hears an impossible voice. A sound that should no longer exist in this world. You? Help? What a joke. You'll only kill them like you do every time. A creeping sensation travels down his spine. This cannot be. Oh, but it is. He cannot mistake that voice for any other. I know you hear me. Salt in a wound. There is a joy in her tone, the kind that comes from toying with another. His throat and tongue go dry. Despite the coolness of the morning, he begins to sweat. It is a symbol of his inescapable past, a shadow that pushes him further into the dark. He clenches his shaking hands and slowly turns around. When he sees her, his head falls. It is the princess from the neighboring nation. She whose death heralded the start of this war. It was supposed to be a ceremony where their two countries entered an era of peace, but she was killed under the suspicion of plotting something nefarious. The boy's own father, the king, had ordered her death. That is why she cannot be here. This is a hallucination, the boy tells himself, as he presses his hands to his eyes. Quiet footsteps echo through the silent room. Tap, tap, tap. The closer they get, the harder it is for him to breathe. The princess comes to his side and leans close to peer at his face. You've noticed, haven't you? Her small hand rests on his arm. Whenever you get involved in things, they end in unnecessary tragedy. That's why things turned out the way they did. As her quiet voice comes to a stop, she turns to look at the paper on his desk. The paper. The number of souls sacrificed in his quest for peace. Lives that should never have been lost. He cannot bear to face her. His mind is filled with images from the day of the ceremony. White fabric stained red. Light snuffed from eyes. Soldiers killed the princess on the order of their king, and the reason for that order. The boy reels. What if he had turned down her invitation? What if he had not accompanied her to the courtyard? Her death lies on him. His thoughtless actions had wrought unnecessary tragedy. Nothing she said to him was wrong. He knows it still holds true, even now. Even if he ran from the room and dashed to the person in distress, he would not be able to save them. His heedless actions bring only misfortune, twisting any shred of hope into despair. Had he understood this in earlier days, perhaps he could have saved the princess. As he continues to ask himself increasingly pointless questions, the strength in his body fades. I'm not blaming you, you know. So why carry this burden by yourself? You would have been better off if you never got involved in the first place. Sweet whispers fill his ears, ones to which the boy has no answer. Finally, he turns from her, placing a hand on the windowsill. Outside, the argument continues. But instead of helping, he pulls the window closed. He will extend no hand. He will not permit himself to suffer that pain again. He shuts the curtains, causing darkness to blanket the room once more. He lies on the bed and closes his stiff eyes as though trying to shut out the world. Once, he made a vow. As the boy who would one day ascend the throne, he vowed to create peace. It was a goal he would never turn from, no matter what. But now, for the first time in his life, he has turned his back on that dream. For the first time in his life, he has turned his back on another. And in so doing, he denies all that he was. The boy who wished for peace has become the boy whose naive ideals bring about only grave misfortune. There comes a soft, timid knock at the door. The sound brings consciousness back to the boy. He slowly sits up on rumpled sheets. Though his mind is hazy, he looks at the door. The knocking continues, meek yet persistent. Finally, a voice calls out. "How do you feel, sire? I hear you have been unwell." Were he his usual self, the boy would immediately open the door and feign a smile. But now, he finds himself unable to get up from bed, unable to do more than stare at the door. Pretty words, but is he truly on your side? The princess stands next to his bed. Her phantasmic eyes bore straight through him. "Let me see your face, sire, please. You must at least eat something." The voice is worried, but the princess speaks over it. "Do you really believe him?" "Of course not. No one in this castle worries for you. Everyone thinks you're a nuisance, nothing more." The words of the princess are poison dripping through his ears. As she says, he has no proof the voice behind the door does not wish him ill. As he learned in battle, there are people plotting betrayal within these very walls. He cannot trust anyone. Not even his own blood, for his brother is clearly after his life. He quiets his breathing and strains his ears. At last, the knocks stop. The sound of footsteps grows distant. The silence in the room stings the boy's ears. The exhaustion that controls his entire being grows a bit lighter. How long did he sleep? He gets up from his bed in search of an answer. He blindly gropes about in the darkness, aiming for the curtained window. His metal staff lies on the ground where he carelessly discarded it. His foot catches it, causing him to stumble. Momentum slams his body into a nearby wall. He makes no cry. He simply sits on the ground, weakly rubbing his own back. He no longer has the willpower to reach the window, nor the strength to return to bed. Yet his fingers latch onto something odd. The robust wall of the castle broke his fall, remaining unharmed by the impact. But there is a small yet obvious gap in the wall. He knows there are hidden passages throughout the castle to be used in emergencies. But he did not know there was one in his room. Perhaps it had gone forgotten amidst the constant reconstruction. He reaches out, drawn in by the inky darkness that extends beyond the gap. It opens with a push, revealing a space wide enough for him to pass through. Beyond is a never-ending hallway. The walls are rotting, brittle enough to crumble under his touch. Holes here and there speak of the vast expanse of time it has sat forgotten. He senses something in the darkness, something that makes goosebumps crawl across his skin. Yet he steps forward all the same. An opaque shadow blankets him. He feels suddenly defenseless. His steps grow unsteady. A voice from behind offers caution. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." It comes from his room behind the wall, where the girl shows no intentions of joining him on his journey. The prince turns back to the corridor and continues to walk. He hears small objects scraping against one another from somewhere ahead. He rubs his eyes and sees the darkness writhe. But it is neither human nor beast. When he finally sees what is coming, his breath catches in his chest. Suddenly, a swarm of insects assails him from all directions. They crawl across him, scratching at his skin. Buzzing fills his ears. Stingers pierce his flesh. Hundreds of legs carry dozens of bodies into his throat, and he utters a hapless cry. Yet, he continues on. For he has seen the faint light of an exit beyond the swarm. He uses every ounce of effort to move forward, tearing apart the darkened mass that weighs on him. He seeks only the light, even though he knows not what it may be. Finally, he batters his way through the horrifying torrent of insects and passes through the exit. The moment the light touches them, they scuttle back into the gloom. His vision opens up before him. He has found what the rotting corridor led to. The moment he lays eyes upon it, an odd sensation fills his heart. For this is a place buried deep within his memory. A familiar scene waits beyond the corridor of writhing insects. Moonlight floods the room through a small window near the ceiling. The furnishings are similar to the prince's own room, but they have sat here untouched and forgotten for an age, and are now covered in a thick layer of dust. Yet somehow, he knows this place. In the distant past, He once knew the moonlight pooling through that little window. He once knew how the edges of everything glittered in the lamplight. He remembers. Seeking answers, he reaches out and takes a photograph off the desk. A shaking finger lightly skims the glass, revealing a faded image of a smile long since lost. This is the Queen's bedroom, his mother's bedroom. It had been built behind his own. After her death, it was sealed up and locked away. The castle staff did not even come here to clean. Sitting atop the small desk is an empty glass, a fountain pen, and a bottle of ink that was never put away. His mother's life remains here, frozen in time. It feels as though she was present mere moments ago. The boy gazes fondly on the chair as he slowly runs his hand across its back. A moment later, his eye catches a discolored piece of paper. It rests on the edge of the desk, as if it was meant to be concealed and then forgotten. He takes it in his hand. The writing is gentle, just as it is in his memory. It is his mother's hand. Written before she passed from illness, the letter never found its intended recipient and was lost to time along with her room. Guilt washes over him in waves. The letter sat here long enough for the color to change, yet he never found it. Now that he has, he feels obligated to deliver it. He looks for the name of the addressee and is shocked to see his own. The letter is an apology. His mother apologizes for shouldering him with the heavy burden of being first in line for the throne. She apologizes for passing to him a weak constitution that makes him more susceptible to illness. The more he reads, the more his joy turns to despair. The letter serves as proof of the pain he caused his mother. If only he had not found the hidden passageway. If only he had never ventured down it. His thoughtless actions have once again wrought unnecessary tragedy. The cruel words of the princess begin to ring out again in his mind. Determined to read no more, the prince moves to place the letter back on the desk. But then he notices a second page, one folded perfectly in with the first. Though he does not want more hurt, he yearns to know what else his mother said. He carefully peels the second page from the first and begins to read. But it is because I know weakness and pain that I have the strength to provide company to others. No one can avoid hardship. Many cannot bear through it and ultimately lose heart. But finding someone who understands their pain is the help they need to carry on to another tomorrow. If you ever see someone hurting, I pray you might go to them and be that understanding ear. You may even lose heart yourself. But if that ever happens, someone you have aided in their time of need will do the same for you. I gave you your name and the belief you will find blessings and hope in your path. After all, what name could inspire more hope for the future than one that means tomorrow? The boy's eyes snap open to reveal a familiar ceiling. He feels as though someone just called his name. He looks around, confused. Once again, he has collapsed on the floor of his room. A strange feeling overcomes him, and he hurriedly climbs to his feet. The spiteful image of the princess is nowhere to be seen. The knife wound on his arm is gone. Perhaps it had all been a dream. In which case, once on his feet, he goes to the spot in the wall where he found the hidden passageway. It has clearly been moved recently. But no matter how hard he pushes, the door does not open. He knows not what is dream and what is reality. But there is an invigorated feeling in his heart. He feels a breeze on his cheek. The window has been left open. He remembers now. People were arguing outside. Was that real? He is yet to forgive himself for his own mistakes, his own failures. But if he were to lose heart over that and give up on others, he would ever remain a failure. So if the arguing is real, he knows what he must do. He picks up his staff, unlocks the door, and moves boldly into the outside world. The white curtains flutter in the breeze, as though seeing him off.